Ethan, a 2-year-old boy, was happily playing in his backyard, running barefoot on the soft grass. His laughter filled the air as he chased a butterfly. Inside the house, his mother, Clara, glanced out of the kitchen window now and then, smiling at the sight of her son enjoying himself. However, she did not notice the shadow near the fence. Just beyond the wooden slats, a thin, tired pit bull stood still, watching Ethan. His fur was dirty, his ribs were slightly visible, and his dark eyes were filled with exhaustion. However, there was something else in them too: hope. The dog hesitated, unsure whether to step forward or walk away. Before he could decide, Ethan's eyes landed on him. His face lit up with excitement, and he pointed eagerly. "Doggy!" The pit bull stood still, looking at Ethan with tired eyes. His ears moved slightly when Ethan spoke, but he did not come closer. His body was stiff, like he was not sure if he should stay or leave. Ethan did not feel scared at all. To him, this dog was not a stranger. He was just a new friend. Excited, Ethan clapped his hands and took a few small steps toward the fence. His bare feet felt the cool grass as he pointed happily. "Doggy," he said again, his voice full of joy. The pit bull's tail moved just a little, but he still did not come forward. He seemed unsure, as if he was thinking about what to do. He had learned not to trust people so easily, but something about this small boy made him pause. Ethan stretched his tiny hand through a gap in the wooden fence, trying to touch the dog. His bright blue eyes were filled with excitement. The pit bull did not move for a moment. His nose twitched as he smelled Ethan's hand. Then, very slowly, he stepped closer. His cold, wet nose touched Ethan's fingers. Ethan giggled loudly, a happy sound that filled the backyard. The pit bull blinked. It had been a long time since he had heard laughter like that. Ethan, feeling even more excited, reached out again. His small fingers touched the dog's rough, messy fur. The pit bull did not growl or pull away. Instead, he let out a soft sigh, almost as if he felt safe. Then something surprising happened. The dog wagged his tail, just a little, slow and unsure but real. Ethan clapped his hands happily. He turned toward the open door of his house, then looked back at the dog, as if telling him to follow. The pit bull seemed to understand. He moved closer to the fence, pressing against the wooden boards. He found a small opening where the wood had loosened. After a short pause, he squeezed through the gap and stepped into the backyard. Ethan laughed in excitement. The dog was no longer behind the fence. He was standing right in front of him. The pit bull stood still, his body still tense. He did not know if he was allowed here. Ethan, however, had already decided. He reached out and touched the dog again, gently patting his side. The dog let out a deep breath. His muscles relaxed a little. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel like running away. Inside the house, Clara was washing the last dish in the sink. She dried her hands with the towel and glanced at the clock. It was time to bring Ethan inside for his snack. She walked toward the window, expecting to see her son playing alone. But what she saw made her freeze in shock. Ethan was not alone anymore. A big, unknown pit bull was standing beside him inside their backyard. Her heart started beating fast. Where did this dog come from? Was he dangerous? Fear rushed through her. Without thinking, she ran toward the back door, her mind racing. All she knew was that her little boy was standing right next to a stray pit bull, and she had to do something before it was too late. Clara's heart pounded as she rushed toward the back door. Her hands trembled as she pushed it open, stepping onto the wooden deck. "Ethan," she called, her voice sharp with fear. Ethan, still standing beside the pit bull, turned toward his mother with a bright smile. "Doggy," he said excitedly, patting the dog's side. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The dog was huge compared to her little boy. His fur was dirty, his ribs were slightly visible, and yet he was calm. He was not growling or showing his teeth. He was just standing there, but that did not matter. It was still a stray dog, and it was too close to her son. Clara's instinct screamed at her to pull Ethan away, to put distance between her child and the unknown animal. She knew stray dogs could be dangerous. They could bite, attack, or carry diseases. Her mind raced. What if this dog suddenly snapped? What if he was just waiting for the right moment? Her feet felt frozen in place, but her hands clenched into fists. She had to act. Before she could take a step forward, the back door behind her slammed open. "Clara!" What happened? It was Michael, Ethan's father. He had been working in the garage when he heard her panicked voice. Seeing her standing frozen on the deck, he followed her gaze. And then he saw the dog. Michael's entire body tensed, his chest tightened, and his stomach dropped. A pit bull, standing just inches away from his 2-year-old son. His first instinct was to run forward and grab Ethan, but something held him back. The dog was not moving aggressively. In fact, he looked tired, almost like he had no fight left in him. Still, that did not mean he was safe. Michael took a slow step forward, his voice firm but controlled. "Ethan, come here, buddy." Ethan did not move. He giggled instead, wrapping his tiny arms around the dog's neck. Clara let out a sharp gasp. Her hands flew to her mouth, her heart hammering in her chest. The dog stiffened for a second. Michael's muscles tensed, ready to react. One wrong move and this could end very badly. But then, something unexpected happened. The dog let out a deep sigh. He did not growl. He did not push Ethan away. Instead, he slowly lowered his head onto the little boy's shoulder. His eyes closed and his body relaxed. Michael and Clara stood frozen. This was not what they expected. Clara struggled to understand what she was seeing. This was a stray dog, alone, dirty, and possibly dangerous. And yet, here he was, allowing her son to hug him like they had known each other forever. Her fear did not go away, but something else started to creep in. Doubt. Michael swallowed hard, trying to think logically. Was this really a threat? The dog was not showing any signs of aggression. If anything, he looked relieved. Still, they could not take any chances. Michael took a deep breath and tried again. "Ethan, buddy, let go of the dog and come to Daddy." Ethan finally turned his head, confused. "Why, Daddy?" "Doggy is nice." Michael exchanged a look with Clara. Her eyes were wide, still filled with worry, but she was not screaming anymore. Michael crouched slightly, keeping his tone calm. "We just need to be careful, okay? Come here, and we will talk about the dog." Ethan hesitated but did not let go. Instead, he looked at the dog and whispered, "It is okay, doggy. Daddy is nice too." The dog let out another slow breath. Michael and Clara could not believe what they were seeing. This stray dog, this pit bull, a breed often feared, was not acting like a threat at all. But could they really trust that? Michael glanced at Clara again. "We cannot just let this dog stay here. We do not know where he came from, if he is sick, or if he belongs to someone." Clara nodded, but her eyes never left the dog. "I know. But look at him, Michael. Does he really look dangerous to you?" Michael turned back to the pit bull. The dog was completely still, his body relaxed, his breathing slow. He was not aggressive. He was not nervous. He was just there, as if he belonged. Silence filled the backyard. The tension between fear and trust hung heavy in the air. One thing was clear. This was not just any stray dog. But what were they supposed to do now? Clara's heart pounded as she rushed toward the back door. Her hands trembled as she pushed it open, stepping onto the wooden deck. "Ethan!" she called, her voice sharp with fear. Ethan, still standing beside the pit bull, turned toward his mother with a bright smile. "Doggy!" he said excitedly, patting the dog's side. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The dog was huge compared to her little boy. His fur was dirty, his ribs were slightly visible, and yet he was calm. He was not growling or showing his teeth. He was just standing there. But that did not matter. It was still a stray dog, and it was too close to her son. Clara's instincts screamed at her to pull Ethan away, to put distance between her child and the unknown animal. She knew stray dogs could be dangerous. They could bite, attack, or carry diseases. Her mind raced. What if this dog suddenly snapped? What if he was just waiting for the right moment? Her feet felt frozen in place, but her hands clenched into fists. She had to act. Before she could take a step forward, the back door behind her slammed open. "Clara?" What happened? It was Michael, Ethan's father. He had been working in the garage when he heard her panicked voice. Seeing her standing frozen on the deck, he followed her gaze, and then he saw the dog. Michael's entire body tensed, his chest tightened, and his stomach dropped. A pit bull, standing just inches away from his 2-year-old son. His first instinct was to run forward and grab Ethan, but something held him back. The dog was not moving aggressively. In fact, he looked tired, almost like he had no fight left in him. Still, that did not mean he was safe. Michael took a slow step forward, his voice firm but controlled. "Ethan, come here, buddy." Ethan did not move. He giggled instead, wrapping his tiny arms around the dog's neck. Clara let out a sharp gasp. Her hands flew to her mouth, her heart hammering in her chest. The dog stiffened for a second. Michael's muscles tensed, ready to react. One wrong move, and this could end very badly. But then, something unexpected happened. The dog let out a deep sigh. He did not growl. He did not push Ethan away. Instead, he slowly lowered his head onto the little boy's shoulder. His eyes closed and his body relaxed. Michael and Clara stood frozen. This was not what they expected. Clara struggled to understand what she was seeing. This was a stray dog, alone, dirty, and possibly dangerous. And yet here he was, allowing her son to hug him like they had known each other forever. Her fear did not go away, but something else started to creep in. Doubt. Michael swallowed hard, trying to think logically. Was this really a threat? The dog was not showing any signs of aggression. If anything, he looked relieved. Still, they could not take any chances. Michael took a deep breath and tried again. "Ethan, buddy, let go of the dog and come to Daddy." Ethan finally turned his head, confused. "Why Daddy? Doggy is nice." Michael exchanged a look with Clara. Her eyes were wide, still filled with worry, but she was not screaming anymore. Michael crouched slightly, keeping his tone calm. "We just need to be careful, okay? Come here and we will talk about the dog." Ethan hesitated but did not let go. Instead, he looked at the dog and whispered, "It is okay, doggy. Daddy is nice too." The dog let out another slow breath. Michael and Clara could not believe what they were seeing. This stray dog, this pit bull, a breed often feared, was not acting like a threat at all. But could they really trust that? Michael glanced at Clara again. "We cannot just let this dog stay here. We do not know where he came from, if he is sick, or if he belongs to someone." Clara nodded, but her eyes never left the dog. "I know, but look at him, Michael. Does he really look dangerous to you?" Michael turned back to the pit bull. The dog was completely still, his body relaxed, his breathing slow. He was not aggressive, he was not nervous, he was just there, as if he belonged. Silence filled the backyard. The tension between fear and trust hung heavy in the air. One thing was clear, this was not just any stray dog. But what were they supposed to do now? Michael stood still, his hands clenched into fists. His instincts screamed at him to pull Ethan away, but something about the way the dog was behaving stopped him. The pit bull was not aggressive, he was not growling, and he had not moved an inch since Ethan hugged him. Still, Michael could not take any risks. "Ethan, listen to me," he said slowly, trying to keep his voice calm. "I need you to let go of the dog and come here." Ethan turned his head slightly, confusion on his little face. "But why, Daddy? Doggy is nice." Michael swallowed hard. "I know, buddy, but we need to be sure. Just come to me first, okay?" Ethan hesitated. He looked at the dog again, as if asking for permission. The pit bull remained still, his breathing slow and steady. He made no attempt to stop the boy, no sign of discomfort. Clara could barely breathe as she watched the scene unfold. Her heart was still racing, but the fear was now mixed with something else. Uncertainty. Ethan finally loosened his grip and took a tiny step away from the dog. Michael reached out his arms. "Good job, buddy. Now come here." Ethan walked over to his father, his little hands still reaching back as if he did not want to leave his new friend. The pit bull did not move. Michael quickly scooped Ethan into his arms and took a step back. Clara finally let out the breath she had been holding. She grabbed Ethan's small hand and squeezed it tightly, as if reassuring herself that he was safe. But the dog still did not react. He simply stood there, watching them with tired eyes. Then, as if understanding the tension in the air, he slowly lowered himself onto the grass, resting his head between his front paws. His body language was clear. He was not a threat. Michael and Clara exchanged a long, uncertain look. "What do we do now?" Clara whispered. Michael did not answer immediately. His mind was running through every possible option. They could call animal control. That was the safest thing to do. But as he looked at the dog lying on the grass, completely still and peaceful, something inside him hesitated. This was not what he expected from a stray dog, especially a pit bull. Most stray dogs would be nervous, jumpy, or even aggressive when cornered. But this one? He looked like he had given up on life, as if he had spent too long wandering, too long without a home. Michael sighed, rubbing his forehead. "We cannot just leave him here." Michael exhaled. His logical side told him that they should call for help, get this dog off their property before something went wrong, but his heart told him something else. Before he could make a decision, Ethan did something completely unexpected. He wiggled out of his father's arms and walked right back to the dog. Michael's body went stiff. "Ethan!" But before he could stop him, Ethan had already knelt beside the dog, resting his tiny hand on the pit bull's head. The pit bull let out a deep sigh, his eyes half closing as if the gentle touch gave him relief. Clara gasped, her hands gripping her shirt. Michael could only watch, his body frozen. Then, the dog did something that changed everything. He nuzzled his head into Ethan's lap. It was not an attack. It was not a sign of aggression. It was a plea for comfort. Michael felt something shift inside him. This was not just a random stray dog. He had come here for a reason. He had chosen Ethan. Michael ran a hand down his face. Clara took a shaky breath. "I see it too." They both knew what this meant. They could not just push this dog away. But could they really take him in? Michael crouched down beside his son. "Ethan, Listen to me." Ethan looked up with wide eyes. Michael hesitated, then said, "We need to find out where this dog came from. Maybe he has a family looking for him." Ethan frowned. "But what if he does not have a family?" Michael's chest tightened. "Then we will figure something out." Ethan turned back to the dog and ran his fingers through his fur. "I think he likes me." Clara knelt down beside them, her fear slowly melting into something else. Understanding. The pit bull, still resting in Ethan's lap, let out another deep breath, as if he knew he was finally safe. Michael finally let out a slow sigh. "All right," he said, standing up. "We will take him to the vet first. We need to check if he belongs to someone." Ethan's face lit up. "Doggy can stay?" Michael exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "For now." Ethan giggled, hugging the dog. The pit bull wagged his tail, slow but steady. For the first time in a long time, he was not just a stray anymore. He was found. And something told Michael that this was just the beginning. The house felt different. Michael and Clara had spent the last hour watching this unexpected visitor settle into their backyard. The pit bull, now resting beside Ethan, had shown no aggression, no fear, and no sign of leaving. Still, Michael was uneasy. He knew they could not just assume the dog was safe. He had heard too many stories about stray dogs suddenly turning violent. He had always believed large dogs, especially pit bulls, were unpredictable. But this one? This one had let a 2-year-old boy hug him without moving a muscle. Ethan was still sitting beside the dog, happily running his tiny fingers through his fur. The pit bull lay still, his ribs rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. He looked exhausted but peaceful, as if this was the first time in a long while that he felt safe. Michael crossed his arms. "We still cannot just keep him." Clara nodded, but she was staring at the dog with a thoughtful expression. "I know. But what do we do? Call animal control." Michael exhaled. That was the logical choice. But as he watched Ethan gently stroke the dog's head, he hesitated. Ethan had never been this attached to anything so quickly before. There was something different about the way he looked at this dog, and even stranger, something different about the way the dog looked at him. The pit bull had chosen their son. But why? Clara crouched next to Ethan, brushing her fingers over the dog's fur. It was rough and unkempt, with patches of dirt sticking to his coat. Up close, she could see old scars hidden beneath his fur. This dog had been through something. Clara looked at Michael. "I think we should check for a microchip first." Michael hesitated. "And if he does not have one?" She shrugged. "Then we decide." Michael ran a hand down his face. He hated not having a clear answer. He knelt beside Ethan. "Buddy, we're going to take the dog to the vet. We need to see if someone is looking for him." Ethan frowned. "But what if nobody is?" Michael sighed. "Then we will talk about it." Ethan looked down at the dog, gently touching one of the old scars on his back. The pit bull did not move, just let out another tired sigh. Ethan whispered, "I do not think he wants to go anywhere." Michael's chest tightened, but he ignored the feeling. "Come on, let us get him in the car." The ride to the vet. Getting the pit bull into the car was surprisingly easy. Michael expected resistance, maybe even fear. But when Ethan took his hand and led him toward the open door of their SUV, the dog followed without hesitation. He climbed inside, curled up on the floor near Ethan's seat, and rested his head on his paws. Michael exchanged a glance with Clara. This was strange. Stray dogs usually panicked in unfamiliar places. They usually resisted getting into cars. But this one? It was like he had done this before. The drive was silent. Ethan occasionally reached down to pet the dog, and each time the pit bull's tail gave a slow, steady wag. Michael tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He had spent his life being cautious, making safe choices. Keeping a stray dog was not safe. And yet, every time he glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw the way Ethan looked at the dog. He saw the way the dog trusted Ethan completely. And somehow, it made him question everything he had thought before. At the vet's office, the moment they stepped into the clinic, the receptionist's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, he is a big one," she said cautiously, glancing at the pit bull. Michael understood the hesitation. People always judged pit bulls first. But this pit bull did not growl. He did not pull on the leash. He simply sat down beside Ethan, completely still. The vet, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, walked over with a microchip scanner. "Let us see if he belongs to someone," he said, running the device over the dog's back. Michael held his breath. If the scanner beeped, it meant the dog had an owner. It meant this was not their decision to make. The room was silent. 1 pass, 2 passes, nothing. The vet shook his head. "No chip." Michael exhaled slowly. He could not say whether he felt relieved or concerned. Clara looked at him. "So, what now?" The vet smiled. "Well, you have got 2 options. You can take him to a shelter and let them try to find his owner. Or, ... He looked at Ethan, who was already hugging the dog again. "You can take him home." Michael hesitated. This was not the plan. They were supposed to drop the dog off and move on with their lives. But standing there, watching Ethan and the pit bull, he knew things had already changed. Clara placed a hand on his arm. "Michael?" He looked at Ethan, who was now rubbing the dog's ears, whispering, "It is okay. You are not lost anymore." And just like that, Michael knew. He sighed, rubbing his face. "I cannot believe we are doing this." Ethan's eyes widened. "Doggy stays?" Michael exhaled. "For now." Ethan let out an excited cheer. The pit bull wagged his tail again, this time a little stronger. For the first time since he wandered into their backyard, the dog looked like he belonged. Michael still had doubts. He still had fears. But he also had a feeling. Maybe the dog had not just found them. Maybe he had. The ride home was quiet, but it was not uncomfortable. Ethan, still buckled into his car seat, reached down every few minutes to stroke the pit bull's fur. The dog, now resting on the car's floor, responded with slow, steady wags of his tail. Michael kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was racing. This dog, this stray that had wandered into their yard, had no microchip, no tags, no clear signs of where he had come from. He could have belonged to someone before, or maybe he had been lost for a long time. Or worse, maybe no one had ever wanted him in the first place. Clara, sitting in the passenger seat, finally spoke. "Michael, do you really think someone is looking for him?" Michael exhaled. "I do not know." They should have been relieved. If the dog had no owner, they were not taking someone else's pet. But instead of relief, there was only uncertainty, because now they had a choice to make. Ethan giggled, still petting the dog's head. "His name is Buddy." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You are naming him already?" Ethan nodded confidently. "He likes it." The dog lifted his head slightly as if hearing the name. His tail gave another slow wag. Michael exchanged a look with Clara. Was it just a coincidence, or had this dog already chosen his new name? Settling in. When they pulled into the driveway, Michael hesitated before turning off the engine. "This is temporary," he reminded himself. They had agreed to keep the dog only for now, just to figure out their next step. But the moment they opened the car door, the pit bull stood up and hopped out without hesitation. He stretched his front legs, let out a big yawn, and then turned to follow Ethan toward the house. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. Well, he is comfortable already. Clara gave a small smile. I do not think he has anywhere else to go. Inside, Ethan was already showing Buddy around, pointing out the couch, the kitchen, and his toy box. The dog simply followed, calm and quiet, his eyes observing everything as if taking in his new home. Michael sat down at the dining table, running a hand down his face. We need to make a plan. Clara sat across from him. Like what? Michael sighed. We have to check lost dog reports. Maybe someone is looking for him. If not, we need to decide whether we can really keep him. Clara hesitated. Michael, do you think he has an owner? Michael looked toward the living room where Ethan was now curled up on the rug beside Buddy, his tiny hands still gripping the dog's fur. Buddy did not move. He just lay there, still as ever, letting Ethan rest against him. Michael swallowed hard. If he does, then why was he wandering around alone? Clara nodded. And why does he look like no one has cared for him in a long time? They both sat in silence for a moment. Then, Clara grabbed her phone and started searching lost dog listings in the area. Michael leaned in, scanning the photos and descriptions. Nothing matched. No missing pit bulls, no reports of a lost dog with Buddy's markings. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere. Michael sighed, sitting back in his chair. Well, that answers that. Clara looked at him. So what do we do? Michael did not have an answer. The first night. Later that night, Michael watched as Ethan dozed off on the couch, his tiny fingers still resting on Buddy's back. The dog had not moved from his side all evening. Clara walked over, whispering, Are you still worried? Michael rubbed his temples. I just do not know if we are making the right choice. Clara sat beside him. Look at them, Michael. Michael did, and for the first time, he truly saw it. This was not just a boy who had found a stray dog. This was a dog who had found his person. Michael let out a slow breath. I guess we will see how things go. Clara smiled. I think things are already decided. Michael did not argue, because deep down, he knew it too. Been looking for them all along. The next morning, Michael woke up with a plan. If they were going to keep this dog, even temporarily, they needed to be sure they were not taking in someone's lost pet. He walked into the living room and found Ethan curled up on the floor, sleeping soundly against Buddy's side. The pit bull had not moved all night. He lay still, his breathing deep and steady, as if this was the first peaceful sleep he had in a long time. Michael sighed. This is already getting too comfortable. Clara stepped into the room holding a cup of coffee. She looked at the scene before her and shook her head with a soft smile. They look like they belong together. Michael ran a hand through his hair. That is what worries me. Clara sat on the couch. Did you check the lost dog pages again? Michael nodded. Nothing. No missing pit bulls. No reports of a dog like him. Clara exhaled. So what do we do? Michael grabbed his phone. I am going to call the shelter. Maybe someone left him there before, or maybe they can check if he was reported missing somewhere else. Clara bit her lip. And if no one claims him? Michael looked toward Buddy, who had now opened his eyes and was watching them quietly. He was listening. I do not know, Michael admitted. Checking the shelter later that morning, Michael called the local shelter. Is he aggressive? The woman on the phone asked. Michael glanced at Buddy, who was lying next to Ethan as the boy played with his toys. Not even close. No, he is very calm, Michael replied. That is surprising, the woman said. Most stray pit bulls we get are scared or defensive. If he is that relaxed, he was probably raised in a home before. That thought made Michael pause. Did this dog belong to someone once? The shelter checked their records. No reports of a missing pit bull matching Buddy's description. No one had come looking for him. "Do you want to bring him in?" the woman asked. Michael looked at Ethan, now giggling as Buddy gently nudged a toy toward him with his nose. Something in Michael's chest tightened. "I will think about it," he said before hanging up. A decision to make. Michael walked back into the living room. Clara looked up from her phone. "Well?" Michael shook his head. "No reports. No one is looking for him." Clara sighed. "So, that means he is just out there, alone?" Michael looked at Buddy, who lifted his head slightly, ears perked, as if waiting for the decision. It was not that simple. Bringing him to the shelter meant giving him up for good. And pit bulls? They did not get adopted easily. Ethan suddenly looked up. "Daddy, does Buddy have to leave?" Michael hesitated. He had no easy answer. But Buddy? He seemed to already know the answer. He placed his big head on Ethan's lap and let out a deep, contented sigh. Michael sighed too. "I think we need to talk about it," he finally said. Clara nodded. "I think we already know what we are going to do." Michael knew it too, but saying it out loud would make it real, and something told him it already was. Michael sat at the dining table staring at his coffee cup. It had gone cold, but he had not taken a single sip. Across from him, Clara scrolled through her phone searching for lost dog reports one last time. Nothing. No one had posted about a missing pit bull. No one was looking for Buddy. Michael exhaled slowly. So, that is it. No owner, no past we can trace. Clara put her phone down and nodded. He really has nowhere to go. Michael ran a hand through his hair. Then, we need to decide. He looked toward the living room. Buddy was lying on the rug, and Ethan was curled up against him, flipping through the pages of a picture book. Every few minutes, Ethan would pat Buddy's back or scratch behind his ears, and the pit bull would sigh softly, content and at peace. It was the safest Michael had ever seen his son with an animal. Michael sighed. Ethan is already attached. Clara smiled slightly. And I think Buddy is too. Michael leaned back in his chair. I never wanted a dog, especially not a pit bull. Clara gave him a knowing look. But? Michael let out a long breath. But now I am not sure I can let him go. Clara nodded. I feel the same way. They sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Michael pushed his chair back and stood. All right, we make this official. Clara raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? Michael glanced toward Ethan, who was now giggling as Buddy rested his heavy head in his lap. Yes, he said, feeling the truth of it settle in his chest. Buddy was not going anywhere. Telling Ethan, Michael walked into the living room and knelt beside Ethan. Hey, Buddy, he said softly. Ethan looked up with bright eyes. Yes, Daddy? Michael glanced at Buddy, who lifted his head slightly, ears twitching. Michael smiled. Would you like Buddy to stay with us forever? Ethan's face lit up with pure joy. Really? Michael nodded. Before he could react, Ethan threw his arms around Buddy's neck, hugging him tightly. Buddy, you get to stay. You are not lost anymore. Buddy let out a low, happy sigh and licked Ethan's cheek. Michael and Clara exchanged a look. That was it. This was no longer just a stray dog. This was their dog. The first night as a family. That night, Ethan refused to sleep in his bed. He grabbed his blanket and curled up on the living room rug beside Buddy, who lay stretched out, his body relaxed. Michael and Clara stood in the doorway, watching. Michael crossed his arms. I cannot believe we are doing this. Clara smiled, leaning against his shoulder. I think we were doing this from the moment he walked into our yard. Michael sighed. Probably. As they turned off the lights, Buddy lifted his head for a brief moment. He looked at Michael. Michael swore he saw understanding in the dog's eyes, as if he knew he was home now. Then Buddy let out a deep breath, laid his head back down, and slept peacefully. For the first time in a long time, he was not lost anymore. He was home.